Good morning, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode number 59. Today is going to be about being struck by the stone of adultery. We're going to read the story and some Bible passages about the woman caught in adultery. Now, the purpose of this isn't that we throw stones. The purpose of today is that we be struck by the stone of adultery. Let's start in John chapter 8, verse 3. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and placed her in the midst of them. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they had continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they had heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more." So I have some thoughts. Number one, let's define what adultery is. Adultery is when you give away something that is best kept for your spouse. And when you take away, or when you take something that is best kept for someone else's spouse. It's when you receive someone who isn't your spouse in a way that is exclusively for your spouse or future spouse. And you may say, well, how about just two consenting adults? Well, the idea there is, well, as if consenting was only and starts and stops between two people. Where's the location of adultery? Well, it can be done with your zipper, clearly, and it can be done with your mind. So Jesus expands the command to recognize that many, maybe even most of adultery, takes place between the ears rather than between the sheets. In Matthew 5:28, he says, "But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." All right, number three, adultery is nothing new. It confronts every generation of God's people and every generation of people not yet of God. And therefore, it confronts you. Way back in Exodus 20:14, when God was just establishing principles in the Ten Commandments, one of them is, "You shall not commit adultery." Number four, adultery is dangerous. And you are the one that's primarily in danger. So why even talk about this? Well, because you're in peril. Proverbs 6:32, "He who commits adultery lacks sense. He who does it destroys himself." So why are we here this morning? Try not to get destroyed. Number five, loving your neighbor, loving the other means not committing adultery. Romans 13:9, "For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Then, so, loving your neighbor, loving the other means not adultering. Romans 13:9 says, or number 6, sorry, marriage can be the antidote to adultery, yet married people can still stray to adultery in their minds. And clearly, divorce is one of the great engines of adultery. Goes without saying that adultery is against the civil and moral law of God. Let's just kind of back up the bus to 40,000 feet. God invented sex. He loves sex. He encourages it by providing boundaries and protections and provisions for it. Within marriage, he gives sex a garden, if you will, a place for it to flourish. And he cares for it so much and he values it so much that he describes boundaries and borders of it. Number 8, who is without the sin of adultery? Verse 7 says, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone." So the woman stands condemned, and we stand condemned. And what are we going to do about it? So who's not been affected by adultery? But just because everybody has been touched by this doesn't mean that this major topic gives us a pass or an excuse for our thoughts or our behaviors. No. This is a passage that literally stops the hands of the self-righteous throwing stones, and it's literally a passage that shuts the mouths of the self-righteous. Number 9, but that is the beginning of the teaching, not the end of the teaching. The purpose of this is not to throw stones, but to be struck by the stone of this lesson. So everybody gets to decide what to do with what they do with their zipper and their mind, both before and after marriage. All right, so a couple conclusions. I'm not the maker of the moral laws of the moral codes of God, but I am beholden to those codes and those laws. The successful performance of this area is difficult and is going to require some faith, which is trusting in the person of God and his character before I see the benefits of that trust. So I imagine this is an area of life that you've at least not done perfectly, and probably many of us egregiously wrong. So now would be a good time to agree with God, confess, and ask forgiveness. That would be a great time to change, to walk, to trust in the God, and use his helper, his Spirit. So today's lesson, the purpose of it is not to throw stones, but to be struck by the stone of adultery and then do the right thing with it. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.